Hello, everyone. Yes, I know. I think I promised I didn't exclusively want to start a channel where I only make videos about college presentations, but what can I say? College is keeping me busy basically all night and all day. So, and if I don't want to completely view this channel, we'll have to continue in that style. But I'll at least try to make this more engaging. But here we have yet another college presentation, one that I'm going to hold tomorrow, or at least tomorrow as of when this video is being recorded. You will see it later, of course. And it's going to be about the evolution of social behaviors like altruism and spite. And you know, as you probably, if you have followed my YouTube channel history, you probably know that I used to debate creationists a lot. And one interesting meme that they showed is this whole idea where there's a man drowning and there's an atheist who thinks that from an evolutionary standpoint, this man should be left to die because the gene pool is strong about him. Then there's a Christian who is, of course, a good person, comes and saves him. And the message is here that evolution can't explain why we aren't selfish pricks. And I mean, like, a lot of people do have this idea of evolution, that evolution only makes you almost super selfish, and dog bites dog, and okay, maybe wolves cooperate sometimes to take down a deer, or you have monkeys who scrape the backs of other monkeys so that they can get rid of a bugs, but that's just mutual benefit. And but like, what about altruism? What about what we call heroism? Like when you have a man who's drowning and you jump into the water and you pull him out, that's no reproductive benefit for you, and you're just risking your own life. So from an evolutionary standpoint, such behavior would be very stupid. And we have an even more extreme example in like colonial insects, where you have entire insect castes who are basically sterile their whole life, and it doesn't matter what they do, they will die anyway, and yet they invest all resources they have into having their queen. And another similarly nonsensical behavior is that of spite. And yeah, you probably all know what spite is, you know, like someone kills your father, you kill their father, and so on. And there's this whole cycle of revenge, and at the end of the day, it helps absolutely no one. And you might think this is pure human stupidity, but some animals are like that too. Like you have this parasitoid wasp, which the letter name here, which produces lots of soldier larvae. And these soldier larvae, they attack other larvae, some of which are even their relatives, and they don't eat these larvae, they don't defend anyone from them. And there's just no point. They just waste all their energy in killing other insects for no reason. And then there's finally a third type of behavior that's not quite easy to explain under evolution, that some organisms sometimes refuse to be selfish. Like, I know it's weird, but there's these Arizona salamanders which regularly eat their own kind because it gives them food, but sometimes they just don't do this. They just hold back. And what all of these behaviors that I've shown, whether it's altruism or spite, have in common is that they don't help the actor. Like altruism helps the recipient, while spite harms the recipient. But what both have in common is that they just force the actor to expend resources for no real benefit. And it's not as intuitive to explain as mutualistic or selfish behavior. But we do have an explanation, and that is kin selection. It probably doesn't like require much explanation why parents care for their children. Like a mom will jump into a burning car to get her babies out. A mom bird will get little worms for her baby birds, even though she doesn't eat them herself. That's how she passes on her genes. But what should be taken into consideration is that it's not just direct offspring that shares the kin. Like if you're a diploid species, your offspring will share half of your genes. And if your grandchildren will have 1/4 of your genes, but your full siblings or your half siblings have just as much in common with you as your direct children do. And the same applies to your nephews and nieces or your cousins and so on. And this is quantified by the degree of relatedness. Like I said before, in a diploid species, your offspring will have half your DNA, and this is shown by this R factor. And it's not always easy to see who is related to whom in a population, so we need genetic markers to find that out. And yeah, this is an example from a little book that my college has given me. But I think it's a publicly available book. And it gives us an example from meerkats who have these so-called natal subordinates who help with raising youngs. And those of them who help raising youngs tend to be relatives of them. And the average degree of relatedness is roughly 0.29, so half siblings roughly. And we have also studied genetic relatedness in social wasps and in slime molds, where it can be even weirder sometimes. Like wasps, they have colonies where they help each other, and slime molds, they clump together in order to consume a prey item together, which I guess also counts as a form of altruism. And but we need a way to talk about this. And you know, they always say evolution is about survival of the fittest and everything, but it's sometimes easier if we just break this thing called fitness down into categories. And you have direct fitness, which is the oh yeah, sorry, that was my phone. I'm doing this completely uncut, so that's a difference from my earlier videos. But yeah, you have direct fitness, which is the reproductive success of an individual, and you have the indirect fitness, which is not my fault. Indirect fitness is the reproductive fitness of genetically similar individuals multiplied by the relatedness. And the inclusive fitness is the sum of the two. And this nice little picture with the two smileys helping each other illustrates it very well. In order to quantify this, we have a rule that's called Tements Rule. And this little rule has those beautiful letters, and it goes B divided by C, or if B divided by C is bigger than 1 divided by R, B, or if R times B minus C is bigger than 0, an altruistic act makes sense. And if you're good at math, you will probably see that these two equations here are exactly the same, just formulated differently. And the thing, of course, is, B are the benefits, C are the costs, and R is the relatedness. So how do I say it? I think I like the equation on the right hand more. If the relatedness multiplied by the benefits is bigger than the costs overall, that's how I put it, then altruism makes sense. Or yeah, I have a sentence here, which I can read out. Altruistic acts are selected for if the benefits to the recipient multiplied by relatedness outweigh the costs to the actor. That's used in a scientific way. And yeah, if you want to see an example of altruism, which I found extreme even when I heard about it as a kid, you probably know that bees, when they sting you, they lose their stinger and they die basically. But they still do this because their colony just matters so much for them. And like these workers, they are sterile, so they will die anyway. Their life means nothing, they only live for the colony, so to speak. And for a slightly less extreme example of altruism, you have these Belding ground squirrels who live in little colonies where all the females live together. And there will be one watchdog, so to speak, and this watcher will give calls whenever there's a predator nearby. And this doesn't make so much sense if you think about it from a reproductive standpoint, because whoever sees the predator could just run away. But when they give out those calls, it's just, they're just attracting attention to themselves. And as you can probably imagine, scientists have used these genetic markers again to study the relatedness, and yeah, those little bar plots, and you have the antagonistic and you have the agonistic, you have the fights and the antagonistic encounters, and oh, sorry. Here you have bars for siblings raised together and raised apart, and you can see that those who are not raised together and were much more willing to fight each other, and that's the same as and also like full sisters were much less likely to fight than half sisters, and full sisters were slightly more likely to hate each other when they were being chased by a predator. And yeah, they even did something similar on black-tailed prairie dogs, where they gave this little stuffed badger in order to simulate a predator. And yeah, these dogs, they live in coteries, and they have those little burrows in which they can hide from a scary predator. And you can kind of see that with bar plots, the proportion of the times where an individual gives a call, you can see that this proportion increases when they have relatives around. And especially when it's offspring, but even with non-descendant relatives, it's still quite high. And curiously enough, there are sometimes alarm calls even when there's no one else to hear them. This is a little bit awkward to explain. The authors of a book I'm taking all this information from, they believe that this is because the alarm calls might intimidate the predator and show, hey, ha, I know that you're here, you can't attack me, and they might be secretly selfish. But personally, I believe that it might just be that we are doing this out of instinct. Like, evolution isn't perfect. It could just be like, okay, there's those predators, and most of the time I have my family around me, so it's best anytime I see a predator, I just give an alarm call, and at least I think that they don't every time just look for relatives nearby, but they just act on instinct. So that's just my theory, but yeah, I'm obviously not a scientist yet, so take of this what you will. But yeah, it's a little bit wishy-washy the way I put it, so we're going to need quantitative tests of Tements Rule if we want to talk about it like that. And one example of a quantitative test has been done on a pair of male wedge turkeys, or on pairs of male wedge turkeys, because these do something called cooperative courtship. And it's really weird to have those males which form coalitions with which they can court females, and when the females are here, they protect them. And there's like one dominant male, one alpha male, and like a bunch of beta males who don't reproduce. But these, I don't know how to say it, they are a little bit doing cuckolding things. They just kind of accept that they are the betas and they help the alpha, and they court the females, but they don't reproduce with them. So yeah, they're just subordinates basically. But as you might imagine, they're related to the alpha male, and the question is, of course, how we can find it out. And you have this beautiful table here where a scientist named Krakawa in the year 2005 collected genetic samples from the turkeys and with genetic markers estimated their mean relatedness. And what he found out was that the mean relatedness was roughly 0.42, so brothers roughly. And they looked at how much offspring a solitary male on average produced, and they found out the average solitary male who just courted females by himself produced 0.9 youngs on average. But those dominant alpha males, with the help of their helpers, they produced 7 offspring on average. So, and 7 minus 0.9 is 6.1, which is the benefit. And these helpers, they produce no offspring at all. So they produce 0.9 children less than solitary males would if they had to put into their shoes. And so the cost for them is that they have 0.9 years less offspring than we would usually have. And we have to do some calculations. And yeah, you know, benefit times ratedness minus cost. And, you know, the benefit that's, yeah, you know, the dominant male gets a surplus of 6.1, the ratedness is 0.42, which we already had this before. And even if you calculate this in a head, it's probably 2.4, 2.5, something like that. Yeah, or 2.6 maybe, I'm not sure. But if you subtract 0.9 from it, you get, yeah, it says here 1.7. And 1.7 is a bigger number than 0. So you can see it's clearly beneficial behavior for the species. But now the question comes, how do organisms recognize their kin? You know, we humans, we can sometimes look at the faces that we have and tell who is related to whom, but that doesn't always work. Like we did, and we have, that doesn't always work. And before we had DNA testing, it wasn't always easy to say who is the father of whom, and animals are obviously even worse than we are at this, so they need some kind of adaptations. And there's, I think Hamilton himself has proposed one rather funny hypothesis, which Richard Dawkins, who himself doesn't have a beard at all, has called the green beard effect. And the green beard effect goes like, I have a green beard and I will be nice to everyone else who has a green beard. And the idea is that there are, how do I say it, genes with multiple effects. Tropic genes, or yeah, I think that's how we call them, but there are genes that give organisms, that when they are present, give organisms a green beard, and also the behavioral attitude that they will be nice to everyone who has a green beard, or green beard can be any trait, of course. They, like, maybe there are genes to give everyone a pretty horn and the desire to be nice to everyone who has pretty horns. So yeah. And we have some examples, like we have fire ants of a genus Solenopsis, which are pictured on the right here, and they have specific genes on their GP9 locus, which have a B allele, and when this B allele is expressed, the queens who have them have a special odor, a very nice smell, and the workers who have these genes, who have these alleles, are programmed to be nice to all the queen who has this odor. And here you see, whenever the workers encounter a queen they are not related to, they execute her. Because they oftentimes there are multiple colonies together with multiple queens, and it's very important to recognize who is whose. But while these green beard genes exist, they're very complicated. because they must code for three things. They must code for a signal, a phenotypical signal. They must give organisms the ability to recognize these signals. And they must promote altruistic behavior. And even getting one of those is very complicated from a genetic or gene expression point of view. And getting all three of those is almost impossible. And there's also the possibility, of course, that they could be exploited. Like you could have an organism that evolves a green beard, but that isn't related to any of the original green beard gene wearers. It could just mimic the green beard, and then, but it wouldn't have the desire to help others. It would just exploit them. And this exploitation means that those organisms who have green beard genes would eventually be outcompeted by false beard genes. Because like I said, they don't have to help others, they just have to benefit. And for this reason, most organisms have something slightly more subtle, and that this, on the right left you see the beardless Richard Dawkins once again, and he basically had the idea that there might be a weaker version of a green beard effect, that organisms are just generally nice to other organisms who are in some way similar to them, like for example in the way their armpits smell. And because obviously everyone smells in some way, but some are going to smell more like you than you do. And yeah, this obviously helps in certain organisms that already have some kind of phenotypical recognition. For example, we humans recognize each other based on our faces, so it makes sense that we can sometimes kind of tell who is related to whom from the faces alone. And there's an experiment that has been done on hamsters, where a bunch of hamster babies have been separated from the mothers when they were very young, and then they were put together. And when they had to mate, and they would obviously avoid close relatives, but they still knew who was related to whom based on the smell alone. And what's interesting is that the hamsters were extremely inbred, so all of their relatives. But even after all so much inbreeding, their scent even picked up those very subtle differences. And I have a somewhat less cute example than hamsters, because there are slime molds from the genus Dictyostelium that can form multicellular slugs, because they normally live in the soil, but whenever the conditions are harsh and there isn't much food, several of those free-living amoebae will form together in an aggregate, and this aggregate can get more resources than just the single amoebae. But there's a catch, because whenever for those aggregates, they come from the soil to the surface, and then they have these flower-like structures where there is a spore at the top and a stalk at the bottom. And the stalk cells, they don't reproduce. They are like insect workers. Their reproductive fitness is 0. They only exist to support the spores. So this is extreme altruism. And the thing is, they grow in the soil. And whenever they go to the surface, they might get amoebae who they have never seen before, so they need a way to recognize each other. And when there were agar-clade experiments where they have been, how do I put it? Where they have been distributed all over, with plates, and they still found each other, and they only clumped the relatedness factor was at least 0.8. So if we were basically clones with some genetic mutations, we can't even imagine that, because we are diploid, so we don't never get above 0.5. Except in twins, but yeah. Well, and but yeah, this whole stuff with armpit effect and green beard genes, that's very complicated. A lot of organisms are much simpler. You probably know all the idea of those brood parasites like cuckoos who go to the nests of other birds, and then they throw an egg out and they replace it with a different one. And like here you, for example, have the nest of an eastern phoebe, and this little turquoise egg is that of a brown-headed crowbird, and it's very similar to, it's very different from other eggs. Like we humans, we immediately see the difference. It has a different color, a different size and everything. But the phoebe will come back, and when this chick hatches, the chick will obviously look different from the others, but the mother will still treat that chicken like it's one of hers. And that for a simple reason, it grew up in the same environment as the others. And yeah, for us, this might be a little bit hard to imagine, but you probably all know the effect of imprinting. Like Konrad Lorenz has observed this in little ducklings. Whenever they interpret the first adult they grow up with to be their parents. And that's basically imprinting for you. And they just do this on environment alone. And the same applies to a Westermark effect, where whenever you have juveniles who grow up together within the first few months or so of their existence, they will not be sexually attracted to each other. And this is so extreme that it's sometimes even possible for birds to imprint on inanimate objects. Like here you have a bunch of Canadian geese and common cranes who imprinted on an ultralight aircraft, and they are flying together with the aircraft as if it was one of them. It's incredible. And yeah, sometimes this like this environment even trumps actual genetic ratedness. And I've shown you this figure before, and one thing I didn't quite discuss was the part A in the upper left corner, because here we are comparing siblings raised together with siblings raised apart, near siblings raised together and near siblings raised apart. And I'd just like for you to look at the two bars in the middle. The siblings raised apart and the non-siblings raised together. And you can see the non-siblings raised together were much more peaceful to each other than the siblings raised apart. Much more. And this is again, I think, an experiment that researchers did on like separating a bunch of squirrels from birth, and what basically happened, what basically happens is that the kin recognition effect, that the environment is just much stronger than relatedness as has been determined by genetic markers. But there is still a noticeable difference between siblings and non-siblings if you just compare those bars, even if it's only small, and it's even noticeable among individuals which have been reared apart. This type of we don't quite know what the reason for this is, and it's only been seen in females, but we don't know the reason for it either. But some researchers are speculating that it could be that when they were raised apart, they still interacted with each other in the womb of their mother. So from then they could already have smelled each other and basically learned how they look like. So even when they meet each other later as adults, they still remember each other. But this explanation doesn't hold up, because the interesting thing with these building ground squirrels is that it's possible for a mother to have multiple male mates, so that there are juveniles from different fathers raised together in one uterus. And despite that, even those who are sometimes only half siblings, who are raised in the same uterus, recognize that they are half siblings and are much more aggressive to each other than to their full siblings. So yeah, this uterus recognition can't be the full story. And experiments have shown that these squirrels are drawn to pubes that smell like their relatives. So it's likely that smell recognition based on odors produced by various glands plays a role. And this is, in my opinion, a very interesting example where you have multiple kinds of kin recognition at once. The environment plays the biggest role, but like they spend a lot of more time investigating cubes that smell like their relatives when they spend time investigating cubes that didn't smell like their relatives. That's what I wanted to say. And this shows that while we have multiple types of kin recognition, environmental kin recognition is stronger than smell-based kin recognition. And now I would like to talk about, I'd like to point out that there's the difference between kin recognition and kin discrimination. Kin discrimination is important in altruistic species that often interact with close kins and with organisms outside of their kin. However, in organisms that have low dispersal rates, they spend all the time around their kin anyway, so it's not even important to see the difference between them and non-kin. But altruistic behavior can still evolve if it's advantageous, and we're going to look at a few examples soon. First, we got copper iron scavenging in bacteria, and there's something you need to know. Bacteria need iron to grow, but iron isn't always available. Most of what you find in nature is insoluble. So these bacteria of the genus Pseudomonas produce iron scavenging siderophore molecules to get around the problem. When we release those siderophores, the iron becomes digestible. However, there's a catch. When a bacterium produces siderophores and makes the iron more digestible, it becomes digestible not just for the bacterium, but for other bacteria who haven't done anything. And as you can see here, there are two types of bacteria cells: the blue cooperative cells and the yellow free radar cells. The cooperatives, okay, they're not literally blue and yellow, but that's just how the diagram shows them. And the cooperative cells produce siderophores to make the iron digestible, and they also eat it. So they give and they take. But the free radar cells, they just eat the iron before contributing anything. They're a bit like parasites in a way. Now, prediction would obviously be if the cooperative behaviors are only useful when you're surrounded by close kin, but do the bacteria do kin discrimination? Can we recognize if someone is a relative, or are we too simple for this? I think to notice that they grow in colonies and move only very slowly, so with a slow dispersal rate, they might not even need a mechanism for discrimination. And yeah, there's a test where the study mixed populations of cooperators and free riders, which they could only distinguish based on color, and I mean, the scientists distinguish them based on color, not the bacteria themselves, so the bacteria can see. But yeah, the scientists had cooperators and non-cooperators, and they created several subpopulations. And the subpopulations with only a single original bacterium had high ratedness, and subpopulations and subpopulations that were made from two bacteria that divided had less ratedness. And when they mixed those populations so that they could have samples where there was high and low ratedness. The high ratedness favored the cooperators, the low ratedness the free riders. This shows neatly that the bacteria just always behave the same and don't discriminate according to kin. It's just a matter of natural selection who lives and dies. And now we get to one of those behaviors that I've shown you at the start of the presentation as a quasi-teaser. The Arizona tiger salamanders and their cannibalism. I think I mentioned they show restrained selfishness, as they sometimes eat their own kin and sometimes they don't. Well, if you have been paying attention so far, it's a no-brainer why. The answer is kin selection, or some of their kin are more closely related than others. The researchers raised several larvae together and found out that the larvae were much less likely to become cannibal morphs than were raised to go with relatives. And when the cannibals did eat relatives, they ate more cousins than siblings. Now, there could be other explanations of kin selection. Maybe they don't eat kin to avoid diseases, but it has been shown that the cannibals did not avoid diseased bodies, and eating relatives didn't make them sick in any way. We even made a quantitative test where we tested two cannibal salamander larvae, one that discriminates against kin and one that doesn't, and each of those got put together with 24 other larvae, 6 of which were siblings and 18 of which were not. Since they were siblings, that made for a ratedness factor of 0.5. In the case of a discriminator, 4 siblings survived and 2 So we have the non-discriminator, creating a net benefit of 2. There is no significant growth difference between the discriminator and the non-discriminator, so the discriminator saves 2 of its kin without a cost to itself, and thus satisfies the conditions of Hamilton's law. It's not known whether discriminators even exist, non-discriminators even exist, since they don't have any benefits over those who do discriminate. But it could be that under harsh conditions, it's sometimes necessary to eat your own kind. We don't know. And now we get to another of these behaviors that I've shown in my teaser at the beginning, and that's spite. You know, harming others at a personal cost. Spite is a rather awkward concept to discuss under Hamilton's rule because an organism takes the cost in order to transfer a negative benefit to a different organism. The equation would only make sense if the organism is negatively related to it, and that can't make sense. After all organisms share at least some DNA. But it does make sense if harming distant relatives helps those you are closely related to, as shown in the picture to the right, because it could maybe just free resources that your relatives now have because non-relatives are now out of the way. And now let's get back to these parasite wasps that I've shown you at the start. In those parasite wasps, we have a soldier caste that harms other larvae for no self-gain. These soldiers are sterile and they don't even defend their broods. As the larvae they kill and harm, and the larvae they kill and harm are even their relatives. So under kin selection theory, the behavior only makes sense if harming those larvae benefits larvae they are more closely related to. Before I can continue, I might need to explain the brooding behavior of these wasps. These wasps normally lay 1 male and 1 female egg into caterpillars. The eggs are undergoing clonal division, and each larvae of the same gender is an identical copy of one another. As one would expect, the female soldiers sometimes attack their brothers, with which they share less DNA with their sisters, and they almost never attack their sisters. Since with their sisters, they share almost 100% of their DNA. But they're even more likely to attack unrelated males and females than their brothers. So this shows that they are willing to kill relatives and non-relatives if it saves resources for their very close kin, because the resources in this caterpillar are extremely limited. And this behavior is exceptional because, as I can't go in detail over this table, but there are many examples of behavior that people used to think was spite, but it wasn't actually spite, that used to have, and where we found out that it had a selfish reason underneath it all. And the reason why spite is so rare is because it's only really advantageous if there's a really strong limit on resources. So to give you a second example of spite, I really had to scrape the bottom of a barrel. And it's about bacteria again. And where bacteria produced bacteriotoxins, or that's not what they're called, sorry, they're called bacteriocins, which are basically antibacterial toxins. The bacteria who produce those often die as a result, so there are no direct benefits for them. However, the bacteria who do survive often have an immunity gene to a toxin and a relative of a bacteria which released it. So it's a good example of killing members of our own species simply to have more resources for closer relatives. So what's the takeaway? The takeaway is that altruism makes perfect sense if one knows Hamilton's law. If the benefit to a kin member multiplied by the factor of relatedness exceeds the costs of the altruistic act, the organism will perform the altruistic act. We've seen plenty of examples of this, with the behavior of a worker insects being the most extreme one. We've also seen that most organisms discriminate kin from non-kin through either green-bird genes, which are rare, or through shared phenotypic traits, or for shared environment, or if dispersal is low, sometimes no kin discrimination happens at all. I'm not quite sure which of those applies to humans, but considering that we look favorably upon people considering that we see those who would jump into a lake to save someone from drowning as heroes, I kind of hope that we humans aren't so strict with kin discrimination. Yeah, and finally, as we have seen, Hamilton's rule not only explains altruistic behavior, but also it explains selfishness and awkward things like spite. And yeah, so yes, what's the takeaway? The moral of the story is, even if we even if we sometimes do good things to others, we are still just machines who exist to selfishly pass on our genes. And if we help people we are not created to, it's literally just because our brains aren't working right, I guess. And it's literally just what we are so strong with kin discrimination. And that's really depressing to think about, actually. But yeah, I think this talk was 40 minutes long. I'm sorry for that. I really thank you if you've watched this video. This is longer than even some of my Life Before Mine episodes. But I think it was a fascinating topic. And what can I say? I really hope I get that global warming video done soon. Because, like, it doesn't matter how you see it. It doesn't matter if you just look for yourself or your relatives or for humanity as a whole. Global warming will fuck us all. Yeah, now I will have so many exams these weeks and so much college work. But I hope you're all looking forward to more videos, and see you next time. Bye.